Alright everybody, so I'm going to share with you some really helpful tools to speed up your process with editing, especially if you have photos that were taken under the same lighting conditions with very similar exposures, and you wanted all of them to look similar once you're done editing them. A good example of when you could use this is if you were a wedding photographer and you photographed a wedding and you want the bride's dress to be the same color in every image. You want, the darkness of the man's tuxedo, the whiteness of the dress, all of that stuff to be uniform through image to image. And so we can do batch editing and we can synchronize edits. And I'm going to show you two different rounds of this. The first one, I'm just going to edit this photo of my dog Shiloh, and then batch edit maybe these, let's see, 6 photos, maybe 7 photos that are similar in exposure, just to get them where I want them. So I'm just going to go to the Develop tab. And here's my photo of Shiloh. I am going to warm it up with the temperature slider. Maybe not that much, but that looks good. Exposure, I'm going to hold down Option, make sure I'm not clipping any highlights or shadows. I'm going to, let's dive into the shadows first. I'm going to open up the shadows so I can see Shiloh's face a little better. I'm going to go down to the blacks, open up the blacks. I'm going to make sure no clipping in the highlights. And no, I'm sorry, I did that backwards. No clipping in the whites, no clipping in the highlights. So that looks good to me. I'm going to bump the the luminance up to 20. I'm not going to mess with saturation here. I'm going to go to HSL, and I'm going to make sure luminance is selected. I do want to just cover, let's just pretend that I accidentally have hue selected, and I go in here, and now all of a sudden the hue of this agave is this like weird magenta, and I'm like, whoops, I made a mistake. I wanted to adjust luminance, but I adjusted hue. Remember, you always have the history tab over here where you can jump back. So I messed up right here, the yellow hue shift. So I'm going to just click back to before that edit was made. And now I can go to luminance and grab the bullseye tool. Maybe bring the luminance up a little bit. Maybe bring it down in the sky. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me right there. I'm not going to split tone this image. I'm going to sharpen it. Remember, you can hold down Option when you're sliding these scales around. When you hold down Option for the amount, it just converts your image to a black and white while you're doing it. It's supposed to help you be able to just focus on the sharpness. I'm also going to look at the little 1-to-1 window. I'm going to bring my radius to 0.5 as I always do. I'm going to leave detail where it's at, and I'm going to bring up the masking. In my own images, I end up masking them somewhere between, 35 and 65. Always seems to give me kind of what I want. That looks good to me. But a lot of that stuff you're going to find on your own, what works for you and what looks good for your images. So lens correction, I'm going to make sure remove chromatic aberrations is on, enable profile correction, all that stuff. Effects, maybe add a little bit of a vignette like that. Maybe feather it some more. Somewhere like here. Maybe bump up some grain. This is not how I'd really edit my photo, but we're just doing it for this demo. Okay, so I'm going to say that that looks pretty good to me. So I just went through and edited this photo. Made it look pretty good. So let's look before and after. So this is after, and this is before. That's a huge change, right? The before, we see that Shiloh is completely no detail in the shade, because what happened was, in a scene like this, my light meter is reading the exposure in the sky and the exposure in the ground, and those dark shadows and those bright highlights are so far apart that something has to give. Something has to be sacrificed. And in this case, it exposed the sky correctly and underexposed Shiloh. But as long as we're shooting in RAW, we can bring back that information. So I think that looks pretty good to me. So now I want to go back to the library tab maybe, and I just want to see, okay, so here's the photo I just edited. I want to actually apply the same edit because these pictures look drastically different now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this edit to these 4, these 5, and maybe 6. I'm going to skip these 2 because these ones we can tell are lighter exposures to begin with. So I'm going to go back to the Develop module, And I'm going to go down to the film strip, and I'm going to select those first 5 that are next to by hitting Shift. And I'm going to jump over to this one and hold Command and click that one. So now I have the original edit selected, the 5 after it's selected. I skipped 2 and selected this one over here. And now I'm going to go to Sync. When I hit Sync, this Synchronize Settings dialog box opens up, and you can pick what adjustments you want there to be, what you want to be synchronized. I'm going to undo crop and spot removal. I didn't crop or spot remove this image, but we're going to dive into that next. Right after this, I'm going to show you guys how we can sync those settings as well. So even though I didn't do things like split toning, I could unclick that, but because I didn't do it, even if it's selected, it's not going to do anything. So I usually just keep everything selected. Even, if I didn't spot remove and crop, those could be selected too, but I want to go through and show you these in our right after this. So I'm going to hit synchronize, and it kind of takes a second for Lightroom to kind of chew on all of that information, but you'll start seeing down in my film strip, these images are going to start changing, right? You guys see that they're changing down there? And I think the edits are all done right here, so let's actually go and look at them. So this might not be, this would be a really useful tool if you didn't change your camera settings at all from photo to photo, but I think I probably did change my camera settings from photo to photo. Like, let's see, in this photo right here, I shot at ISO 100, 55mm, f5 at 1/320th of a second. Let's look at this one right here. See, I changed my shutter speed and actually the aperture. So it is a little bit different. So I have it in the ballpark, right? But just because I edited this one perfect doesn't mean it's going to apply perfect to all of them. So you still might want to go in and just do a little bit of fine tuning. So I synchronized them so that they all have pretty similar settings. And now I could go and select this one and maybe bring the exposure down a little bit. Maybe, yeah, actually that looks pretty good right there, just doing that. And so you can just synchronize those settings to get it really close in the ballpark, and then dial it in with a little bit more adjustment. And I usually find that I just have to slide the exposure down, 0.2 stop, something like that. So that's how you can synchronize a bunch of images with the same edits. I think that's super useful. So let's go back out to the library tab, and now I'm going to show you how you can synchronize things like cropping and spot removal brush. So I will tell you this, synchronizing crop always works pretty well, but synchronizing the spot healing brush kind of takes a little bit of fine tuning. So I'll show you how to do it. So I'm going to actually synchronize the settings between this photo, number 60, 61, and 62. We see that they're very similar, right? I'm sure you guys are a lot like me, where you see something you want to take a photo of and you take a couple photos of it. And let's just pretend that I want to edit this guy. So I'm going to develop. I don't necessarily think this is that interesting of a photo, but it's a good demo photo. So I'm going to bump up the white balance. Remember, color is subjective, so it's up to you to decide what you want it to look like. Open the exposure. I'm going to hold down Option. Make sure I'm not clipping highlights. Minimize my clip shadows. That looks pretty good to me. That looks pretty good. Let's actually, you know what? Let's actually keep going down here. Let's go clarity up 20. Let's actually make this a black and white image. We're going to mix the black and white information to get it where we want it. Maybe too much. That looks good. The aqua and the blue should be opening up the exposure in the sky. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. I actually I like this photo a lot better in black and white. I didn't think it was very interesting in color. I'm going to take the amount. That looks pretty good to me. Radius, drop down to 0.5. Let's bring the masking up. That looks good right there. Okay, and I know that I can cruise through this stuff, and I know you guys might feel a little bit more burdened with some of these decisions, but that just comes with practice. Okay, so I think this looks good to me, but before I move on, I want to crop it and spot heal it. So I'm going to actually crop this using a different aspect ratio. So I'm going to open the crop tool. I'm going to pick 4x5, 8x10 aspect ratio. Bring it up somewhere like right there. That looks pretty good to me. I like how this line kind of goes down to this corner right here. Yeah, I'm gonna hit return. That looks good to me. And let's say I want to get rid of this crack right here. Now this is not something I really would do, but once again, for the demo, we'll do it. So I'm gonna grab the clone stamp, and I'm gonna go in here. Oop, let me pop this window that always pops open. I'm going to, remember you can scale up the size of your brush with the bracket key. The right bracket makes it larger, left bracket makes it smaller, or you can use the slide dial here. I'm going to feather this a little bit so that it blends in nicely. Alright, so I'm just going to paint over this crack. No promises that this is going to be perfect here. Let's see what it comes up with. Whoa, it's picking way far away. So I'm gonna drag this down here, maybe somewhere a little closer, somewhere like there. Let's see what that does. All right, that looks pretty good to me. I don't necessarily think it's like the best the best clone stamping in the world, but you know, it does an all right job. I think that looks pretty good right there. So I'm gonna say done. I'm gonna say it's good. Okay, so once again, let's look at before and after on this photo. So here's after, there's before after. Okay, so now let's say that I want to synchronize this photo with the two photos next to it, this one and this one, which are very similar, but I don't want to have to redo the crop and I don't want to have to redo the clone stamping. So I'm going to select the first one, hold down Shift, select all three. I'm going to go to Sync. And now when I do this, I want to make sure that I have crop and spot removal selected. So once again, crop always works really well. Spot removal, we're going to have to maybe do a little bit of tweaking, but I'll show you how to do that. So now I'm going to hit synchronize. Now we can see that down in my film strip, it just applied those changes to my images. And every time I do that, it like lags my computer because I think it's like kind of just takes a lot of information. So let's give it a second to load these changes. It's thinking, you can tell right here. Still thinking. Alright. Let's see what happened here. So, let's see if we can. I'm just going to hit on a different photo to kind of reboot everything. So here's the original edit. That's the first photo that I edited with the crack gone. It looks pretty good. I'm going to go to the first synchronized photo. Here it is. Uh-oh. We see that the crack is still there. So I'm going to grab the tool, and what happens is it usually makes the select or makes the adjustment, but it needs to be shifted a little bit. So I'm just going to grab the edit button here, if my computer lets me, and I'm going to drag it over the crack like that. So I just had to drag it a little bit. Okay, I'm going to say that that looks good. Done. Okay, and I'm going to go to the last one. Oh, it didn't do the crack on that one either. Well, it did, but it just didn't put it where I wanted it to. And that could just be because I wasn't shooting on a tripod and that crack ended up in different places on the photo. We see that it's off just a little bit. It's off, you know, just a hair. So you just got to take it and drag the edit over what you want covered. Give me 1 second here. Okay. So that's just a really quick way of applying that edit to one photo and then synchronizing it across photos. So I did it in the first one with the one of my dog of, you know, all of the global settings, and then in this one I did with all of the global settings, crop, and spot heal. So I hope that was really useful for you guys. It's a good way of speeding up your process, especially if you're doing things like portrait shoots or something like that. So I hope that was helpful.